I know you feel exhausted right now. You have given everything to this person, your time, your patience, your emotional energy. And yet, the more you tried to show them how much you cared, the further they pulled away. It makes no sense on the surface, does it? We are taught that if we love someone hard enough, if we are good enough, if we just stay patient enough, they will eventually wake up and appreciate what they have. So you stayed. You over-explained. You waited by your phone, analyzed every single text, and bent over backward to keep the door open. Here is the painful psychological truth that nobody tells you. Your constant care became their emotional safety net. Think about it this way. As long as you were reacting, chasing, and proving your love, you were taking on all the anxiety in the relationship. They didn't have to face the consequences of losing you because you were constantly reassuring them that you weren't going anywhere. Your availability gave them the luxury of taking you for granted. They could pull back, test the waters, or act indifferent, knowing with total certainty that whenever they turned around, you would still be right there, holding the bag of emotional investment. I remember reading a study on human perception and value, and it highlighted something fascinating about the way our brains process availability. The moment a resource is unlimited, its perceived value plummets. It's not that you weren't valuable, it is that your endless accessibility eliminated the possibility of them ever missing you. You cannot feel the weight of someone's absence when their presence is guaranteed. The exact moment everything shifts, the exact moment their anxiety about losing you actually begins, isn't when you get angry, and it isn't when you send a long paragraph explaining your feelings. It is the moment you finally stop caring. It's when your energy completely disconnects. Because when you stop broadcasting your emotions and step out of the dynamic, you remove their buffer. The illusion that they have all the time in the world to decide if they want you vanishes into thin air. You force them to finally sit in the cold, quiet reality of a world where you simply do not belong to them anymore. There is an ancient Zen parable that explains why this shift is so terrifying, yet so profoundly necessary. Imagine holding a handful of wet sand. The moment you panic and squeeze your fist tight to keep it from slipping away, the pressure forces the sand out through your fingers until your hand is completely empty. But if you open your palm flat, the sand stays exactly where it is. Relationships operate under the exact same law of emotional physics. When you try to force someone to see your worth, when you plead, monitor their social media, or constantly check the emotional temperature between you, you are squeezing your hand as hard as you can. You are trying to control an outcome using sheer force of will. But human affection cannot be coerced. The harder you pull, the more pressure you create, and that pressure triggers an instinctual drive in the other person to push back and protect their autonomy. Think about it this way: true power never comes from gripping tighter. It comes from the willingness to let go. In Eastern philosophy, there is a concept known as non-attachment. People often confuse non-attachment with being cold, unfeeling, or passive. They think it means you stop loving the person altogether. It doesn't mean that at all. Non-attachment simply means you stop tying your internal stability to something you cannot control. It means loving someone without holding a gun to the universe's head, demanding that they love you back on your exact terms. When you exist in a state of high attachment, your energy becomes inherently needy. You are constantly broadcasting a subtle message to them: I need you to validate me so I can feel okay. And people can feel that weight, even if you never say a word. It feels heavy. It feels like an obligation. But when you transition into non-attachment, your energetic footprint completely transforms. You shift from attempting to prove your worth to simply holding your own space. Imagine what happens when you step out of that tug of war. For weeks or months, you have been holding your end of the rope tight, straining every muscle to keep them connected to you. They have been pulling back, feeling the tension, anticipating the resistance. And then, without warning or drama, you just drop the rope. What happens to them? They stumble backward. The dynamic breaks. Silence is a mirror as long as you were reacting to them. sending long texts, or trying to fix things. You were giving them something to react to. You were giving them a distraction. Your emotion allowed them to focus on your behavior instead of facing their own choices. But when you withdraw your energy and step into stillness, you take away that distraction. You turn off the noise. Suddenly, the mirror is clear. They look into the silence, and they don't see your desperation anymore. They see their own absence. They are left alone with the quiet reality of what life actually feels like without your warmth, your light, and your consistent presence. I know how hard this is. I know every instinct in your body is screaming at you to do something, to say something, to fix it before they forget you. But you have to understand that your constant action is what kept them comfortable in their distance. Step back. Let the quiet do the heavy lifting for a moment. You aren't doing this to manipulate them or play a game. You are doing this because you deserve to sit in your own peace instead of bleeding your energy into someone who isn't holding space for you. When you stop holding on to what is hurting you, you don't lose them. You simply stop losing yourself. I know how tempting it is to believe that if you just give them a little more time or find the exact right combination of words, they will suddenly realize what they are losing. But we have to look at what is actually happening inside their mind from a clinical perspective, because human psychology does not operate on hope. It operates on incentive and perception. I remember reading a study in behavioral economics that explored how the human brain calculates value, and it uncovered a powerful phenomenon known as loss aversion. The data showed something remarkable. The psychological pain of losing something is twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining it. But here is the critical catch. Loss aversion only kicks in when the brain perceives an item as truly gone. As long as you were available, texting back immediately, and checking in, their brain never registered a loss. It registered a permanent asset. You were like a subscription service they didn't have to pay for. They could enjoy the comfort of knowing you were there without paying the price of commitment or investment. Think about it this way. In behavioral psychology, there is a concept called intermittent reinforcement. It is the exact mechanism that makes gambling so addictive. When a reward is unpredictable, the brain floods with dopamine. When you were constantly reaching out, trying to figure out where you stood, you were actually putting them in the position of the reward giver, while you became the one addicted to the breadcrumbs. But when you stop caring, when you cut off that flow of validation cold, the entire neurological feedback loop breaks. Suddenly, the dopamine hit of your predictable attention stops. The brain hates a sudden vacuum. It immediately enters a state of cognitive dissonance, because the story they told themselves, "I can have this person whenever I want," is violently contradicted by reality. That contradiction creates an intense psychological friction. For the first time, their brain registers a genuine threat of permanent loss, and loss aversion finally fires off. There is another fascinating psychological mechanism at play here called psychological reactance. Whenever human beings feel their freedom or their options are being limited, they naturally fight to restore them. When you were trying hard to get close to them, they felt their freedom threatened by your expectations. They pulled away to protect their independence. However, the moment you truly step back and walk away, the dynamic flips. By pulling yourself out of the equation, you are no longer threatening their freedom. Instead, your absence creates a new limitation. They no longer have access to you. Suddenly, their options feel restricted. Their desire to regain access to you isn't even necessarily about love at first. It is a knee-jerk psychological drive to restore an option they thought they held forever. This is why the regret only happens after you stop caring. It cannot happen a moment sooner. When you were caring, you were doing all the emotional labor for both of you. You were holding the grief, the anxiety, and the urgency. But emotional energy in a relationship operates like a dynamic ecosystem. When you drop your end of the weight, that grief doesn't just disappear into thin air. It shifts onto them. They are finally forced to carry the weight of their own decision. They have to sit in the silence of their quiet apartment, look at their phone, and process the fact that the person who loved them unconditionally is no longer standing by the door. You didn't break their heart by leaving. You simply allowed them to feel the full, unfiltered weight of the choice they made. So how do you actually execute this? Because understanding the psychology is one thing, but sitting alone in your room on a Sunday night, fighting the urge to reach out, is a completely different battle. Moving from intellectual understanding to real, embodied detachment requires a deliberate shift in how you operate every single day. Step 1 is establishing a complete boundary shift. You have to move from reactive availability to intentional silence. Think about how you have been responding up until now. Whenever they sent a breadcrumb, a late-night text, a casual reaction to your story, a low-effort "how are you?" your nervous system went into overdrive. You replied within minutes. You kept the conversation going. You treated a bare, minimum effort like a major breakthrough. But in psychology, there is a term called lower threshold responsiveness. When you respond instantly to low-investment behavior, you teach the other person that they can access your emotional energy without offering any real commitment in return. You need to raise the price of admission to your life. Silence is not about playing a game or trying to get a reaction. Silence is a boundary that protects your peace. If they send a low-effort message, you do not rush to match their energy. You do not use it as an opportunity to ask where you stand or explain your feelings. You match their investment, or better yet, you remain silent. When you stop treating breadcrumbs like a feast, you force them to realize that casual access to you is no longer on the table. Step 2 is reclaiming your energy pipeline. I remember reading a study on cognitive bandwidth that explained how our brains have a finite amount of processing power every single day. When you spend months obsessing over someone, analyzing their last active status, decoding their tone, wondering what they meant by that last sentence, you are bleeding your cognitive bandwidth dry. You are running a heavy background application in your mind that exhausts your system before your day even starts. You have to manually redirect that energy. Think about it this way. Every time you catch yourself spiraling into thoughts about them, recognize that your attention is literally currency. You are depositing your life force into an account that yields zero return. The goal here isn't to pretend you don't miss them. It is to intentionally redirect that bandwidth back into your own life momentum. Start building a life so compelling, so focused on your own physical, mental, and personal growth, that detachment stops being a strategy you perform and becomes your actual reality. When you are deeply invested in your own trajectory, you naturally don't have the time or interest to wait around for someone who treated you like an option. Step 3 is refusing to be an option. And this requires an absolute standard of self-respect. Most people make the mistake of waiting for the other person to change their mind. They sit in a state of suspended animation, hoping that one day the person will wake up and choose them. But as long as you are waiting, you are operating from a place of fundamental powerlessness. You are handing the remote control of your emotional state to someone who proved they don't know how to handle it. I want you to look at this clearly. You are not a waiting room. You are a high-value destination. When you decide that you are no longer available for lukewarm effort, something profound happens to your internal posture. You stop asking, "Why don't they want me?" And you start asking, "Why was I willing to settle for someone who made me feel so insecure?" That simple shift changes everything. You stop seeking their validation and start enforcing your own standards. When they eventually reach out, and if you hold this line, they almost always do, they will expect to find the same eager, anxious person waiting at the door. But when they find a calm, composed individual who is no longer emotionally dependent on their approval, it fundamentally disrupts their expectations. They realize that while they were taking their time figuring out what they wanted, you were busy realizing what you deserved. This isn't about getting revenge. Revenge is still an emotional attachment. True power is cold, quiet indifference. It is the ability to look at someone you once cared deeply about and recognize that while you wish them well, they no longer hold any power over your future. At the end of this journey, you are going to arrive at an unexpected realization. Right now, you might still be secretly hoping that following this psychological shift will finally make them wake up, pick up the phone, and realize what they lost. I understand that pull. It is completely human to want the person who made you feel small to finally see your true worth. But the ultimate plot twist of detachment is that by the time they actually experience that regret, you won't even care about receiving their apology anymore. Think about it this way: the desire for someone else's regret is just the final ghost of your own craving for validation. It is the last remaining thread keeping your emotional energy tied to their altar. As long as your ultimate goal is to make them feel the pain of losing you, you are still letting their perception define your peace. You are still holding your breath, waiting for a judge who proved themselves totally unqualified to evaluate your value. I remember reading a study on emotional recovery and self-concept after major relational ruptures. The researchers found that true healing does not occur when an ex comes back or admits they were wrong. Real psychological closure happens at the exact threshold where an individual's sense of self-worth becomes entirely decoupled from the other person's behavior. When you stop needing them to realize what they lost, you reclaim total sovereignty over your own life. Regret on their end is simply a natural side effect of human psychology. When you pull your warmth, your attention, and your predictable presence out of their life, the sudden vacuum forces them to confront the reality of their choices. But that regret is their emotional homework to do, not yours to monitor. Your job is not to stand outside their door waiting to see if they finally get the lesson. Your job is to keep walking down the path you built for yourself. Reframe this entire experience right now. Detachment is not a strategic tactic to manipulate an ex into missing you. It is not a game of chicken to see who breaks first. Detachment is the ultimate act of self-respect. It is the quiet, firm decision to stop pouring your spirit into a cup that has a hole in the bottom. I know it feels terrifying to let go of the rope. You worry that if you stop caring, if you stop holding on, the relationship will officially be over. But I want you to ask yourself a hard question. What are you actually holding on to right now? You are holding on to a potential that doesn't exist in reality. You are holding on to a story you created in your head about who they could be if they just tried harder. You are holding on to stress, anxiety, and a constant low-grade feeling of inadequacy. When you drop that rope, you aren't losing a great love. You are losing a source of chronic anxiety. You are opening up your hands so that you can finally receive something that actually meets your standards. If this message resonated with you today, do not let it remain just a piece of content you watched on a screen. Turn it into a boundary in your life, starting right now. Stop checking their profile. Put down the phone. Pull your focus back to your own body, your own mind, and your own path. Take a deep breath, step out of the dynamic, and finally give yourself the loyalty you have been burning yourself out, trying to give to someone else. You are worth far more than the breadcrumbs you were settling for, and it is time you started acting like it.